Pen was already in my hand. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table for 20 minutes, staring at the signature line on the contract transfer documents my brother had couriered over that morning. 32 pages. Tabbed in 4 places with those little yellow sticky arrows that said signed here. My coffee had gone cold. Outside, the first real snow of November was coming down over Ottawa, soft and indifferent, covering everything. I was about to sign away my share of my father's company. Then my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Okafor, the accountant who had worked with my dad for 19 years. The message was 3 sentences. I read it twice. My hand stopped moving. Do not sign those documents. I found something in the transfer agreement you need to see. Call me from a different phone. A different phone. I sat there for a moment, the pen still in my fingers, the snow still falling. Then I put the pen down, walked to my bedroom, and dug out the prepaid phone I had bought 2 years ago for a solo road trip through northern Quebec when I'd been worried about roaming charges. I charged it for 4 minutes, just enough, and I called him back. He answered before the second ring. Vivienne, he said. And his voice had that particular quality I recognized from every difficult meeting I had ever watched him sit through with my father. Calm the way a surgeon is calm. Not because nothing is wrong, but because someone in the room has to be. I need you to listen carefully. I went through the full transfer package last night. The version your brother sent you is not the version that was filed with the corporate registry last Tuesday. I said nothing. The snow kept falling. There is a clause on page 19 that was not in the original agreement. It gives your brother sole signing authority over the operating accounts effective on the transfer date, which is this Friday. Once you sign and once that date passes, you would have equity on paper and no access in practice. He could drain the business accounts, take on debt against the company assets, and you would have no legal mechanism to stop him without going through superior court, which would take 8 to 14 months minimum. I put my hand flat on the table. I needed to feel something solid. He also, Mr. Okafor continued, retained a consulting firm out of Calgary last month. I found the invoice in the company email archive, which I still have access to from the annual audit. They specialize in what's called equity dilution strategy, minority shareholder removal. They are very good at what they do. I heard everything he said. And then underneath it, I heard something else. The quiet, accumulating sound of the last 3 years rearranging itself into a shape I could finally read. The delays on my father's estate that my brothers said were normal. They were not normal. I had called 2 estate lawyers independently and both said the timeline was unusually extended. The investment account my father had set up for me jointly, which my brother said had been consolidated into the business for tax purposes, while Dad was sick, and which I had never seen documentation for. The meeting with the family lawyer 6 weeks after the funeral, where my brother had handled all the paperwork and I had shown up still not sleeping properly and signed 3 documents in 20 minutes because my brother had said it was routine and I was exhausted and I trusted him. The way he had called me twice in the past month, to check in, to ask how I was doing, to mention that the transfer process was almost complete and I must be so relieved to finally have it settled. His voice so warm, his timing so precise. I had told myself I was being paranoid. That grief makes you suspicious. That my brother loved my father too. And this was just a hard time for both of us, and of course there were complications. There are always complications with estates. This was normal, I was fine. I was not fine. I was being managed. Vivienne. Mr. Okafor's voice came back. Are you still there? Yes, I said. I'm here. I know this is a great deal to take in. Tell me what I need to do. There was a brief pause, and I think he was relieved. He had known me since I was 11 years old. He had been at my father's retirement party and at his funeral. He knew I was not someone who fell apart easily. But he also knew what the past year had cost me. He chose his words like someone who had prepared them. Don't sign anything today. Don't let your brother know you've spoken to me. I have already printed and notarized copies of both versions of the agreement with timestamps showing the discrepancy. I've sent them to my own lawyer for safekeeping. Tomorrow morning I can meet you at the office of a corporate litigation attorney I trust. Her name is Sandra Beaumont. She is very good and she will know exactly what to do with this. He's expecting the signed documents by end of business today, I said. I know. That's why he timed it this way. He paused. Your father trusted you to handle this well, Vivienne. He talked about you often. He said you were the one who would know what to do when things got difficult. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But I had spent the last 14 months crying in the right moments and holding it together in the wrong ones. And this was very clearly a hold it together moment. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, watching the snow. My brother's name is Bennett. He's 6 years older than me, which means he was 27 when I was born and had already spent almost 3 decades being the only child. The one who got called first, the one whose opinion was asked. The one who stood next to my father at the company Christmas parties and shook hands with clients. I came late. I was the surprise. My mother used to say I was the best kind of surprise, and she would look at my father when she said it, and he would smile in that particular way he had. Bennett never looked at me that way. I had always told myself it was just a personality difference. That some siblings are close and some aren't. And ours was a relationship of polite distance, holiday dinners, the occasional text. I thought I was being generous and mature about it. I thought not pushing for closeness meant I understood that people are complicated. And family is complicated and you can love someone in a limited way and that's okay. What I didn't understand was that the distance wasn't neutral. It was strategic. I started thinking about the things that had gone wrong over the past 3 years, and this time I didn't let myself explain them away. The professional reference that never arrived. I had applied for a board position with a mid-sized non-profit in my field, a role I was genuinely qualified for, and I had listed my brother as a reference because he knew the executive director and because I was trying. I was always trying. I didn't get the position. 2 months later, someone I knew on the board mentioned, in passing, that there had been some concerns about one of my references. I had assumed it was someone else. I hadn't pushed. I hadn't followed up. I had decided not to make it a thing. The introduction that didn't happen, my father had wanted to connect me with his mentor, a man named Gerald Ledare who had built and sold 2 companies and was exactly the kind of person who could have opened doors for me. My brother said he would set up lunch. He set up the lunch. Then the week before, he called and said Gerald had to cancel and would be in touch to reschedule. Gerald never rescheduled. A year later, at my father's funeral, Gerald shook my hand and said he had always wanted to meet me. That my father talked about me all the time. That he was sorry they had never found the time to sit down. The time. I had always assumed it was the time. The way my brother had responded when I started my own consultancy 3 years ago. A small practice in supply chain management, something I had spent 2 years planning. He had been supportive in the way that leaves no fingerprints. Full of reasons why the timing might be hard, the market uncertain, the overhead higher than I expected, perhaps better to wait another year. Nothing hostile. Nothing I could point to. Just a steady low hum of doubt that I had absorbed without realizing I was absorbing it. I had launched anyway. The practice had done well. He had come to my opening and brought wine and said he was proud of me. And I had been grateful. I had been grateful for that. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the prepaid phone on the table and the original contract beside it, I understood something my father had apparently already understood and had tried in his quiet way to protect me from. He had structured the estate to require my signature, not just Bennett's, mine. He had made us equal co-inheritors of the company, even though Bennett had worked there for longer and argued during the estate process that he deserved more. My father had held firm. He had told the estate lawyer in writing that the split was intentional, that both his children had contributed to the company in different ways, and that he wanted the transfer to be handled carefully and equitably. I know this because Mr. this. Okafor showed me the note the next morning across a table in Sandra Beaumont's office in the Glebe. While the sky outside was still pale grey and Sandra was reading through the 2 versions of the contract with the focused attention of someone who charges $400 an hour and earns every cent of it. Getting to that morning took one more evening. After I called Mr. Okafor, I needed to not do what every instinct was telling me to do, which was to call my brother immediately and confront him. I am not naturally patient. I am someone who likes problems resolved, who gets uncomfortable sitting with unfinished things. Bennett had always known this about me. It was one of the things he used. The way you can use a person's own good qualities against them, the impatience, the directness, the impulse to say the thing out loud so you can stop carrying it. If I called him, he would know something had shifted. He would move faster. He might file something, change something, send a courier for the documents, and pressure me in person. He had already once shown up at my apartment unannounced, 9 months after the funeral, to drop off what he called Dad's personal files. I had been grateful then too, so I didn't call him. I sent him a text that said the documents were taking me a while to review and I would get them back to him by tomorrow end of day. His response came in 4 minutes. No worries, take your time. Just want to get this wrapped up for both our sakes. The warmth was perfect. The timing was telling. That evening, I called my cousin Petra. Petra is on my mother's side and has nothing to do with the company, which is exactly why I called her. She's 38, a nurse practitioner, pragmatic and warm, and not easily rattled. She and I had grown up spending summers at my grandmother's place in the eastern townships, and she was the person I called when my father was first diagnosed. She came to the hospital 3 times during his last month, even though she had 2 kids and a full caseload, and the drive from Kingston was 3 hours. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything in about 12 minutes, sitting on my bathroom floor with the door closed for no rational reason, just that it felt like the right amount of privacy. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Do you need me to come tonight?" I said no. I said I just needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't involved, who would tell me if I was reading this wrong. "You're not reading it wrong," she said. There was no hesitation. "What do you need from me?" I told her about Sandra Beaumont. I told her about the morning meeting. I told her I would call her after. "Okay," she said. "I'll be awake. Call me from whatever phone, actually." And here she paused in the way Petra pauses when she is thinking something through she hasn't said yet. "What about Jess?" Jess is my brother's daughter. She is 17, lives with him and his wife in Kannada, and she had started texting me about 3 months ago. Small things at first, asking me about Ottawa's restaurant scene, asking if she could come visit my office. Then gradually, things that were not small, questions about her grandfather's company that I now realized were careful questions. The kind you ask when you already have suspicions and you're trying to confirm them without making yourself visible. I had noticed this and not known what to do with it because she was 17 and he was her father, and it was not my place to put her in the middle of something. But she had already put herself there. I said goodnight to Petra and I sat on the bathroom floor for another few minutes, and then I texted Jess. I said, "Hey, are you around to talk? Not urgent, just catching up." She replied in under a minute with a voice note instead of a text, which told me she was somewhere she didn't want to be overheard. "Aunt Vivienne," she said, her voice low and fast. "I've been wanting to call you for weeks. There's a file folder in the home office. I saw it by accident when I was looking for the printer paper. It has your name on it and some papers that look like legal stuff and a post-it note in my dad's handwriting, and I don't know what it means, but it didn't feel right and I didn't know what to do." I asked her what the post-it note said. She read it to me, signature deadline Friday, transfer window closes Saturday, if unsigned escalate. I kept my voice steady. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. I told her I needed her to do one thing for me, one thing, and only if she felt safe doing it. "What?" she said. "That folder, if you can get to it tonight without being seen. I want you to photograph every page and send it to this number." I gave her the prepaid number. There was a silence. I could hear her breathing. "Is my dad in trouble?" she asked. I didn't lie to her. I said I didn't know yet, but that I was working to understand what was happening and that I needed her help to do it. "He loves you, you know," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the word loves, in the way that people's voices crack when they are saying something they need to believe and are afraid might not be true. "He talks about you sometimes, when he thinks I can't hear." "I know," I said, which was maybe not entirely true, but it was the kindest thing I could offer her right then, and I think she needed kindness more than precision. She sent me 17 photographs 20 minutes later. The folder contained the second copy of the modified contract, 3 emails between my brother and the Calgary consulting firm, a handwritten timeline, and a quote from a family law specialist on the cost of contesting an estate when one party has already been granted sole signing authority. He had been planning this for at least 8 months, possibly longer. Sandra Beaumont had a word for it the next morning. Actually, she had several words, all of them precise and none of them gentle. She explained what my brother had done, what he had attempted to do, and what the legal exposure was for each action. She had a printout of the corporate registry filings. She had the notarized comparison that Mr. Okafor had prepared. She had a look on her face that I recognized from the very few times I had watched my father deal with someone behaving badly in a business context. Not angry, just resolved in the way that you only get when you have been doing something long enough to stop being surprised by it. The fraudulent modification of a transfer agreement is a serious matter, she said, as is the evidence of premeditated equity dilution with the clear intent to remove a co-inheritor from meaningful participation in the company. Your father's original intent is documented. The discrepancy is documented. The consulting arrangement is documented. This is actually a stronger case than most I see at this stage. I asked her what happened next. She said we had two options. We could file immediately, which would freeze the transfer, trigger an investigation, and make everything public and adversarial. Or we could send a single letter, what she called a notice of full awareness, to my brother's lawyer today, which would accomplish the same legal freeze while giving Bennett the option to come to the table before this became a court matter. Mr. Dont. Okafor, who was sitting in the chair beside me, said, "Vivienne, what do you want?" I thought about Jess, 17 years old, photographing documents in her father's home office at 11 at night, sending them to a prepaid phone because something didn't feel right and she had trusted me with that feeling. I thought about what happens to kids when a family implodes in a courtroom. I thought about the post-it note, signature deadline Friday. Escalate, send the letter, I said. The letter went out at 11:14 in the morning. My brother called me at 2047 in the afternoon. His voice was different. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was something I had never heard from him before, which was the sound of someone who is run out of a particular kind of performance and doesn't quite know what to do with their face. He said he wanted to explain. He said there were things I didn't understand about the company, about the financials, about what it had taken to keep the business running while our father was sick and I was not there. That last part delivered with a precision that told me it had been prepared, held back, and ready. A blade wrapped in a legitimate-sounding grievance. I let him talk. I did not defend myself. I did not tell him what I knew or how I knew it or who had helped me. I said I had retained legal counsel and that Sandra would be in touch with his lawyer to discuss next steps and that I hoped we could resolve this without going to court for Jess's sake, among other reasons. The mention of Jess's name landed somewhere. I heard it in the half-second of silence before he responded. "This is not what Dad would have wanted," he said. "No," I said. "It isn't. What you did isn't what he would have wanted either." He hung up. 3 weeks later, the original transfer agreement, the one my father had actually instructed the estate lawyer to draft, was signed by both of us in Sandra's office, with Mr. Okafor present, and filed with the corporate registry before noon. My brother retained his share. His salary from the company was unchanged. The sole signing authority clause did not appear in the final document. The Calgary consulting firm sent a brief email to Sandra's office confirming the engagement had been terminated. He and I have not spoken since. I don't know if we will. I find, when I let myself think about it clearly, that I'm not sure we ever actually did. Not in the way that counts. Not in the way where you feel seen by someone, and they feel seen by you. What we had was proximity and the performance of family, and I spent a long time mistaking that for the real thing. Jess comes over more Sundays now. She's applying to universities, considering kinesiology at Queen's or possibly McGill. And she has opinions about everything and makes very good tea, and once stayed for 6 hours because absorbed in a conversation about her grandfather that neither of us had expected to have and both of us needed. She asked me once, a few months in, if I was angry. I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. Sometimes, I said, but mostly I'm just glad I found out before it was too late to do anything, and I'm glad you trusted me. She was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea. "He's still my dad," she said. "I know," I said. "That doesn't have to change." She nodded like she was filing that away somewhere useful. My father built that company over 31 years in an industry that didn't make space for him easily. Through 2 recessions and one very bad flood year in 2013 that nearly ended everything. He was not a dramatic man. He didn't make speeches. He just showed up every day for 31 years and he made something that lasted. He also paid attention. He noticed who his children were, each of us, separately and clearly, without filtering it through what he wished we were. And when he understood that one of his children needed protecting, he built that protection quietly into the documents, into the structure, into the choice to call Mr. Okafor every year on his birthday, as well as his professional retainer. I didn't fully understand that until I was sitting on Sandra Beaumont's floor, Not literally, but the internal equivalent, holding the pieces together and figuring out where they went. Some protections only work if you're paying attention enough to receive them. I am paying attention now. I keep thinking about the pen, how close I was to putting it on that signature line. 20 minutes of staring at 32 pages, a cold cup of coffee, snow coming down outside, and not a single part of me that thought to question why the documents had arrived by courier instead of through Sandra's office, why the timeline was suddenly urgent, why my brother's texts had gotten so warm in the weeks before the deadline. That's the thing about being slowly conditioned to doubt yourself. You stop noticing when your instincts are trying to tell you something. I had spent 3 years absorbing a low, steady current of undermining, missed introductions, a reference that never arrived, gentle suggestions that my timing was off, my market was uncertain, my judgment was perhaps not quite ready. None of it dramatic, all of it deliberate. And because it was delivered by someone I shared a last name with, I had filed it under complicated family dynamic and moved on. What saved me wasn't luck. I want to be clear about that. It was Mr. Okafor spending an evening going through documents he didn't have to go through, because he had known my father long enough to understand what my father had actually intended, and cared enough to make sure it was protected. It was Petra, who didn't hesitate for even a second when I called her from the bathroom floor at 10 at night. It was Jess, 17 years old, doing something genuinely brave in a house where bravery was not rewarded, because her sense of what was right was stronger than her fear of what was comfortable. The outcomes in this story followed directly from the choices people made. My brother made choices over 8 months, careful, calculated, patient choices, and they came apart not because of bad luck, but because the people around him had better values than he had accounted for. He had assumed that loyalty could be purchased, that information could be controlled, that a person worn down by grief would stay worn down. He was wrong on all 3 counts. I've thought about what I would tell someone who found themselves where I was, holding a pen over a document that feels slightly wrong but you can't quite name why. I'd say, name the feeling anyway. Integrity isn't just about the big moments of obvious wrongdoing. It's about the smaller, quieter decision to trust the part of you that says something is off, even when you can't prove it yet, even when saying so out loud might make things difficult. And I'd say, build the kind of relationships where someone will call you from a different number to tell you something hard. Mr. Okafor didn't have to do what he did. Sandra Beaumont didn't have to clear her morning. Petra didn't have to stay on the phone. They did those things because that's who they are, and because I had spent years trying to be someone worth that kind of care in return. Jess asked me once if I was angry. The honest answer is that I was, for a while. But what I feel now is mostly gratitude for the people who showed up, for my father's quiet foresight, and for the fact that I was paying enough attention to receive what he had tried to give me. Some things you only understand after you almost lose them.